Earlier today, I talked to Greg Weber about surfboard design in the 1980s. Greg's one of the most influential shapers in modern surfboard design, and you might have seen his boards under the feet of people such as Kelly Slater, Taj Burrow, and Andy Irons, just to name a few. We do go off on quite a few tangents, but Greg's a really interesting guy, so it's well worth a listen. I started off by asking him what the surf industry was like at that time.
I left Angari, so I started Insight with Rod Dahlberg and my brother John in '83,
Yeah,
and then a guy Avalon said, "Look, it's all very well. You're living the idyllic lifestyle up there,
yeah,
but if you want money and turn it into a brand, come down to Avalon, and we'll make boards out of monorail." And soon after, the hand shaping for probably not even a year, a guy that knew that we were doing some reasonable quality, a local shaper, came to us with his profile machine. And so very early, compared to a lot of people, we got onto doing our rockers in a controlled way.
yeah.
And the reason why that's good is because, and these young shapers, if they are to do boards from scratch, they'll realize that the blanks aren't always exactly the same rocker,
Mm.
and so that's just a thing that the machines will take care of, because once it's cut one side, that becomes the true curve that the program understands, the software understands.
Mm.
You turn the board, and it doesn't matter what the deck was really like, as long as you cut that whole thing off, it'll be done. And obviously they cut the deck first, and that's the one that they have to be more careful of. However, as you'd know, hand shaping, you're at the mercy to a degree of the neatness of the rocker.
Mm.
Number one, it might not be what you thought it was, but number two, there could be bumps, and they can be 30 centimeter long hollows or bulges that you've got to account for. And that's the not fun part of the '80s, having to try and clean up the blank. Worst thing about it was that if the shaper, can't see curves very well, then the inherent flaws in the blank find their way into the board.
So, the 80s was, it's 10 years. I guess a lot of stuff happened.
Well, the tri-fin obviously was a huge thing at the very beginning of the '80s.
Yeah.
Having Simon come up with that fin combo, that was pretty helpful. And I think one thing I do remember is that we were locked into some pretty moderate rocker and V, a boxy rail, or a flat deck and a slightly sloped rail. I'll do it again. See, not much more curve than that.
Yeah.
And that's a platform. There's no flex at all in the board, so we didn't even think about flex.
Mm.
And you'd run from a flat to a V at the back and run it off the back and muck around with not a stinger so much, a flyer square, big wide squares. The fins were probably too far back and they were too stiff. They're like 30 layers of fiberglass, foiled,
Yeah.
tiny fins, tilted out usually a bit, pointed to the nose a little bit too much, and too far back, like 10.5 inches and 3. And they were lovely platforms, nearly always 3-stage rockers as well.
Can you just explain that a bit
Sure.
more?
A little bit of a flat rocker between your feet.
Yeah.
And there's not much harm in that. And I'll give you an example of when it works perfectly. Peter Daniel, not the Monoval one, but the South African shaper. Peter Daniel's board for Tom Curran, and he wrote it. It might have been one of the first surfs he ever had at Jeffreys Bay.
Mm.
Board never went slow, but you couldn't pump it to go faster than a certain speed. You would never notice it, and it looks like some of the best surfing that's ever been done. But what I noticed was it doesn't change its speed.
Mm.
Now that you get from a platform kind of board, because you can't disengage the board and pump and have it actually almost come out of the water with the pump. You know what does that? Curve the whole way.
When were the decks of the boards
Rolled.
in as well? Yeah, or was roll?
I'll try and think. I'm not great on dates, but don't forget they probably started. There could have been a phase where they were more rolled even earlier, because there were. Most of the blanks were S decks early on, and that was what was shaped in the late '60s, early '70s.
Yeah. And
Could have
by
been
by that you mean it kind of
exactly, from tail to nose
Like that, yeah,
on the deck and then down and then flips on the nose.
yeah.
A great idea. One of my pet dislikes. And what got retained was not an S deck, but for decades, and it's still now, is a semi-straight line and then a nose flip.
Mm.
And so many of these, budding shapers want to do themselves a favor. Look at the deck line from the tail, lift it up and down, and have it, and try to look at it at a few angles, not dead center. So you move the board, so your head might be 30 centimeters from the tip of the tail. You lift the board up, so you can see what I'm doing here.
Mm.
So not dead, and you move it sideways to your left.
Mm.
That's either side, but you're probably holding it in your left hand. Lift it up, and then you're seeing the stringer line. That is probably the most important thing to understand. Oddly enough, it doesn't even touch the water. When you look at a board side on, Steve, as you know, you're holding the board, let's say a blank side on, you hold it at arm's length down below you. No one holds it up in the air like that. You can with the surfboard because it's light enough. With a blank, you look down and you look at the rocker of the board.
Mm.
What you are distracted by is thickness distribution. It varies from center being thicker, thinner at the tail, thinner at the nose. But that curve is not very big, obviously, because if a blank's 3 inches thick and there's a total of 7 inches of rocker, then you're not seeing much curve on the deck. And so that absence of, not absence, but that lower level of curve has forever made shapers just keep focusing on the bottom all the time.
How do you think the deck curve affects
Yep.
the performance?
It does in two ways. One, it influences the thickness distribution. And so if you've got a really blended curve in the bottom and you don't have a blended curve in the deck, that means the thickness in the middle will drop away more quickly than it should. It's not similar to the bottom. If the deck rocker is similar to the bottom, that's great. But then, sorry to say, but there's another whole thing that you've got to think about prior to that. It isn't a golden rule without realizing that if you're going to do this smooth curve deck and bottom, you've got to have thought about what's the total amount of rocker that I can use if I'm going to approach the board in this way. So that's the sad thing about designing. You can't really just look at it as three sets of 2 dimensions.
And so how do you get in ArcuShaper then? Are you looking at it in the 3D?
Yeah, in the bay, you can still do it.
Yeah.
But the shapers, and they're not looking at it the same angle. I don't want to give away 100% of my little tricks. That's as much as I can give away, that once you look at that line, then you're off to a good start. At least consider it. So when you do that, the good thing is that it goes from the rocker curve onto the rail, and the plan shape starts to function more then. They're always in combination, but when you're on the flat, it's almost all rocker. And as you gradually go over onto the rail, even though it happens quickly, there's a transition onto the rail, and then the character of the plane shape starts to matter more. Well, not more, but more than what it did. It's always rocker more than plane shape. But the rocker, as the plane shape starts to become a factor more and more as you get on rail. The link between the curves is a key element. And the other one is obviously straights and bumps. How well smooth in that thing.
I'm imagining you're going to inspire some of the students to actually get in the shaping bay themselves. And
hope so. Well, then again, it's a really difficult industry.
Yeah.
No, and if they keep it at a low level and don't invest too heavily in it, and just look at the shaping machines they can use. So if they can get good on the program, because they're going to be young and they understand software better than us, they can actually start designing, and they'll see the physical form. It gets cut, they shape it, they try to sense the whole board, get it glassed, write it, and then you get the feeling of what you did. And so in that sense, it's one of the greatest crafts on the planet, because it's probably the main one that you can sense the entire character of the board through your feet and riding on a wave of all things. We've just got small number of fins and a 3-dimensional form that's incredibly basic.
Okay, so you made it to the end of the video. I hope you enjoyed it. Maybe even got excited to shape a surfboard, but that's it.